The night the sea tried to kill me, a woman I did not know pulled me out of it, and I let her believe I was no one, because for the first time in my life I wanted to be. I had come up the storm coast on foot, in a dead man's cloak, with 3 days of frost in my beard and no name that anyone owed a knee to. That was the point of it. A king learns the shape of the men around him, the way a blind man learns a room, by the walls that never move, the loyalty that never bends because it is nailed to a throne and not to a heart. I had grown sick of walls. My father had died in the autumn, and before his body was cold, the border lords had come to me with their oaths held out like coins, and I had looked at every one of them and known, to the marrow, that not one of those oaths was to me. They were to the crown. They were to the wolves I could call. Take the crown away, take the pack away, leave only the man, kalen, cold and tired and alone, and those same lords would have stepped over my body to reach the next warm throne. So I put the crown down. I told my sister Bryn to hold the Grey Hall and say the king was grieving in the high country, and I walked out into my own realm as a beggar, to see who kept faith when there was no king watching and nothing to be gained by it. The storm coast was the last place I meant to go. It was the poorest, the farthest, the least worth a king's worry, a run of gray villages clinging to gray rock, where the men fished the black water and the women mended the nets, and the whole coast paid its tithe to whatever hard hand held the cliff fortress above. For 20 winters that hand had been Castellan Dreed's. He had taken the hold in the confusion of an old war, and no king had ever come to take it back, and the shore had learned to kneel. I had known of Dreed the way a man knows of a stain on a far wall of a house too large to keep clean. I had never once ridden out to scrub it. That was the first thing the shore taught me, before I ever reached it, that a stain you do not scrub becomes, in time, the wall itself. I came down into the village they called Coldmere in the last gray light of a dying storm, half drowned, because the tide had caught me on the strand, and I had not known the water there the way the shoreborn knew it. The sea had rolled me and let me go the way a cat lets a mouse go, bored, and I had crawled up the shingle on my hands with the salt burning in my chest, and I remember thinking, with something that was almost laughter, here is a fine death for the Alpha King of the North. Drowned in his own kingdom, unclaimed in a beggar's coat. And then a bell began to ring. It was not a joyful bell. It was old bronze, cracked at the lip so that the note came out of it broken, and it rang in a hard, deliberate rhythm, 3 and 3 and 3, that I would come to know as the shore's warning, the sound that meant the hold is coming down, hide what you love. I lifted my head off the stones and saw her for the first time by that broken sound before I ever saw her face. A slight figure up on the sea-wall against the last light, hauling the bell rope with her whole weight, her braid whipping, her feet braced, ringing the alarm for a village that had every reason to have forgotten how to be warned. Down the shore, torches. Dreed's men, a half-dozen of them, coming along the strand toward the boats with the swagger of men who have never once been made to answer for anything. I have stood on battlefields. I have watched shield walls break and reform. I have seen brave men do brave things with an army at their backs and a cause in their teeth. I tell you plainly that I had never seen anything braver than what that girl did on the seawall at Coldmere with nothing at her back at all. She let go of the bell. She climbed down. And she walked out onto the strand and put herself between 6 armed men and a beached fishing boat with a torn net drying over its hull, and she did not run, and she did not beg, and she did not raise a weapon she did not have. She simply stood there in the failing light, a net mender in a patched gray dress, and made 6 men decide whether they were the kind of men who would walk over her. "That's Gethin's boat," she said. Her voice carried down the shingle, low and even. "He's 3 days from mending the hull. Take it tonight and it sinks in the harbor and the hold gets nothing and Gethin gets nothing and you've made 6 children hungry for a boat that's no good to anyone. Leave it 3 days and it's whole, and the tithes whole, and everybody wins but your pride." The lead man laughed. "You reckoning sums for us now, bell girl." "Somebody has to," she said. "I got my feet under me. I did not mean to. I was a beggar washed up half dead on the stones, and a beggar has no place in a quarrel between armed men and a village. And every cold instinct of the 20 years I had spent learning to be a king told me to lie still in the shadow of the boats and watch, that this was exactly what I had come for, a chance to see the shore true, unperformed, with no crown to bend it. Watch Kalen, learn who she is when no one is protecting her. And I stood up anyway, because something had happened in my chest that I had no word for. I have tried in all the years since to say it right, and I have never done it. The books call it the bond, the mate mark, the pull, the wolf's knowing, and all of those are true, and all of them are too small. What happened to me on the shingle at Coldmere, watching a stranger stand her ground in the dark, was quieter and more total than any of those words. I had been a man adrift for a very long time, longer than the autumn, longer than my father's death. A slow, lifelong drifting. I had stopped even noticing the way you stop noticing a sound you have always heard. And standing there, salt-blind, freezing, nameless, I felt myself drop anchor. That is the only way I can say it. Something went down out of me and caught, hard, on the floor of the world, and held, and for the first time in my life the tide could pull all it liked, and I was not going anywhere. I was fixed. I was where I was meant to be. And the thing I was anchored to was a woman who did not know I existed, ringing a broken bell for people who called her bell girl like it was less than a name. It undid me that it happened then. That is the part I have never told anyone but her. Not on my throne, not in my strength, not crowned and terrible with 1,000 wolves at my heel. I had imagined, in the idle way young kings do, that when my mate came to me it would be like that, a meeting of two high things. Instead, the truest moment of my life found me on my knees on wet stone in a dead man's coat, worth nothing, owed nothing, able to offer nothing, and it was more real for that, not less. I understood, kneeling there, exactly how much I had let my crown do my living for me. Because without it, I was only a man who had just discovered that his whole heart belonged to a stranger, and had no idea in the world what to do about it. So I did the only thing a beggar could do. I stood up, and I stumbled forward into the torchlight, and I fell down at the lead man's feet, coughing seawater, and I made a scene. "Alms," I croaked. "Alms, masters, erect man, the sea took my—" I let a fit of coughing take the rest, which was not hard, since half the ocean was still in me. It was a poor plan. It was barely a plan at all. But it did the one thing I needed. It turned 6 pairs of eyes off the girl and onto the sodden ruin of a man flopping at their feet, and it made them, for a moment, the biggest men on the strand again, which is the only thing men like that ever truly want. "Look at this," the leader said, prodding me with his boot. "Coast's crawling with washed-up trash tonight." He looked from me to the girl and clearly decided that a drowned beggar and a torn boat were together, not worth the walk back up to the hold in the cold. 3 days, he said to her, jabbing a finger. "The hull's whole in 3 days, or it's kindling. And you—" The boot again in my ribs, not hard, just enough to feel like a man, get off the shore before the tide finishes what it started. They went. The torches climbed the cliff road, and the broken bell was silent, and the storm blew itself out over a black and grumbling sea, and I lay on the stones and shook. And she came and knelt beside me. "You great fool," she said, and there was no anger in it, only a kind of tired wonder. "You could have drowned twice tonight, once in the water and once at their feet. What did you think you were doing?" I could not tell her the truth. I was trying to save you, and I did not know how, because I have never in my life had to save anyone with only my body. So I told her the beggar's truth. "Cold," I said. "Hungry. Didn't think at all." She got an arm under me. She was stronger than she looked. All the shore women were. Hauling nets is not soft work. And she got me up off the stones and up the shingle and did not once ask me who I was or where I came from or what I could do for her, which is a set of questions I had been asked, in one form or another, by every single person I had met since the day I was born. She only got me to my feet and pointed me at a low light in a low doorway and said, "There's a fire. It's not much of one, come on." Her name was Selah. I learned it from an old woman by the fire who called out, "Selah, what in the deeps are you dragging in now?" when we ducked through the door, and then, seeing the state of me, softened and said no more. The house was 1 room, stone and turf, a fire of driftwood and dried weed that gave more smoke than heat, a loft above for sleeping, nets hung to dry along every wall so that the whole place smelled of tar and salt and the sea. There was an old man in the corner mending a creel who I later learned was Gethin, whose boat she had just saved. The old woman was his wife, Nan Oren, half-blind, sharp as a gull. And there was Selah, who I could see properly now in the firelight for the first time, and I will not pretend to you that I looked at her like a beggar looks at the woman who has just saved his life. I looked at her the way I have looked at her every day since, like a man looking at the one fixed point in a moving world. She was not what the ballads make a Luna. She was thin from a hard winter, with chapped hands and a burn scar old and pale along one wrist from some long-ago accident with a lamp. Her dress was patched at the elbows and the hem, and her hair, unbraiding now by the fire, was the plain brown of wet sand. But there was a stillness in her that the whole room bent toward without knowing it did, the way Gethin, mending, angled his shoulders to keep her in the corner of his eye. The way Nan Oren's sharpness went gentle when Selah crossed near her. She was the youngest person in that room and somehow its center of gravity. When she moved, the house resettled around her. She fed me. That is the thing I have never been able to get past in all the years, the small, enormous fact of it. There was a pot on the fire with almost nothing in it, a thin fish stew, more water than fish, stretched to feed 3 through a lean night. And she took the wooden bowl and filled it and put it in my 2 shaking hands and sat back on her heels and watched me eat a fourth of what they had, and there was no calculation in her face at all. No weighing of what a drowned stranger might be worth. No sizing up whether I could pay. She did not know I was a king. She had every reason to think I was exactly what I appeared to be. Another mouth, another burden, one more cold thing the sea had thrown at a village that already had too many. And she fed me first. I had been fed by 1,000 people. I had been feasted by lords who mortgaged their harvests to set a table I would remember them by. Not one of them had ever given me anything, because there was nothing in their giving that was not an investment in my crown. Selah gave me a bowl of thin stew she could not spare, and it was the first food I had eaten in my whole life that was truly a gift, and I nearly wept into it, and told them it was the salt still in my eyes. "You'll sleep by the fire," she said when the bowl was empty. "In the morning we'll see about getting you down the coast to somewhere with more than we've got. There's nothing for a working man in Coldmere if that's what you're after. The hold takes it all." "The hold," I said, "the castellan." Something crossed the room. Gethin's hands went still on the creel, Nan Oren's mouth thinned. It is a thing I have thought about often since. How a single word can be a bruise a whole village presses gingerly around. "Dreed," Selah said, and she said it flatly, the way you name a weather you cannot change. 20 years he's held the cliff. 20 years he's taken the tithe, and then he's taken more than the tithe, and then he's taken the men who complained about the tithe. There used to be 40 boats on the shore. There's 11. He takes the young ones up to the hold to work, and half of them don't come back down, and the ones that do don't talk about it. He'd take the bell if he could find where we hide it. He knows we ring it to warn each other, and he hates that we've got even that. A shore that can warn itself is a shore that isn't quite broken yet. "And no king has come," I said. It was not a question. It was, I think, a confession, though only I knew it. Selah looked at me for a long moment across the low fire. "No," she said. "No king has come. The king's in the north in his warm hall, and the storm coast is a long, cold way from anywhere that matters. We stopped waiting for a king a long time ago." She said it without bitterness, which was somehow worse than bitterness. Bitterness would have meant she still felt the wound. This was scar. "We do for ourselves out here. It's all there's ever been." I lay by that smoking fire long after they had climbed to the loft, and I did not sleep. I lay and listened to the sea grind at the shore that was mine and had never once known me, and I thought about the word king, which I had worn my whole life like a second skin, and how in Coldmere it meant the one who did not come. I had spent the autumn nursing a wound about loyalty, about lords who loved my power and not my person, about oaths sworn to a crown and not a man. And here in a turf house on the edge of my own realm, I met the other half of that wound, and it shamed me to the bone. Those lords owed their oaths to me. What did I owe to the shore that had knelt for 20 years while I sat in my warm hall being wounded about the quality of my flatterers? I had come to the storm coast to learn who kept faith when no king was watching. I was beginning to understand that I was the one who had not kept it. I did not go down the coast in the morning. I told them the sea had left me too weak to walk, which was a lie, and I stayed, which was the first honest thing I had done in a long time. I stayed a day, and then I stayed a week, and then I stopped counting, and in the staying I learned the shape of Coldmere and the shape of the woman who held it together, and both of them worked their way into me and would not come out. I made myself useful, because a beggar who eats and does not work is a beggar soon put out, and because, I will be truthful, I could not bear to take from Selah's thin stores without putting something back. I had never done a day's honest labor in my life. I had trained for war, which is not the same. War is a spending of strength, and labor is a keeping of it, hour on hour, day on day, and it is far harder. I hauled nets until my king's hands, which had held a sword since I was 7, blistered and bled and finally hardened. I split driftwood. I patched a roof badly and then better. I learned from Gethin how to read the black water, where the current ran, where the tide would take a fool who did not know it, the very knowledge whose lack had nearly drowned me. Gethin taught me to see the way he did everything sidelong without seeming to. Never turn your back to it whole. he'd say, coiling a line, not looking at me. Give it a shoulder always. It takes the men who trust it. He'd been the shore's finest boatman once, before his hands stiffened. Now he mended what he could no longer sail, and he watched the young men take his boat out each dawn with a face that gave away nothing and a grip on his creel needle that gave away everything. There is a particular grief in a man who has become the one who waits on the shore. I came to love that stubborn old man, and I never told him what I was until the very end, and when I did he only nodded, as if a part of him had known the sea would eventually throw something back that it owed. I watched Selah, and I learned that she was the reason Coldmere was still a village and not a graveyard. It was not that she was loud, or that she led the way the ballads say a leader leads, out front with a banner. She led the way the keel leads a boat from underneath unseen, taking the whole weight of the sea so the folk above her could ride. When a family's boat came in empty, it was Selah who quietly saw that their children ate, sharing out her own portion so no one had to know they'd been given charity. She had a genius for it, for giving in a way that left the taker's pride whole. When old Nan Oren's eyes failed too far to mend nets, it was Selah who did Nan's share in secret and let the old woman keep the coin and the dignity both. When a boy named Pell came back down from the hold after a season of Dreed's work with a limp and a silence and a flinch at every raised hand, it was Selah who sat with him on the seawall in the evenings, not talking, just sitting, until the flinch went out of him. A whole season of evenings, giving nothing but her presence, asking nothing back. I learned, too, in those weeks the full weight of what Dreed's grip meant, because I saw it come down. Twice while I was there his men rode into Coldmere for the tithe count, and both times I watched the whole village go small and gray and careful, folding itself down the way a creature folds itself flat in the grass while the hawk passes over. They counted the fish. They counted the boats. They walked into houses without knocking and took what caught their eye, a good knife, a hung side of dried fish, once a girl's carved wooden comb that a man turned over in his fingers and pocketed while she stood there, and said nothing because saying something was how you ended up climbing the cliff road and not coming back. And through all of it Selah moved among her people like a hand smoothing a frightened animal, catching an eye here, a shoulder there, spending her calm on them the way she spent her stew, keeping them from the one fatal reflex, the flare of anger that would give Dreed the excuse he was always fishing for. I stood among them with my head down and my hands still and my whole body screaming at me to end it, and I did not, because to end it then was to end my chance of learning the thing I had come to learn, and because, I confess it, some cold king's part of me still needed, to see how far the shore's faith would hold before it broke. It did not break. That was the thing that undid me in the end. It bent and did not break, and the reason it did not break was standing in a patched gray dress at the center of it, refusing quietly every single day to let her people become as small inside as Dreed had made their lives. And then the sea gave the shore a test that had nothing to do with Dreed's men, and everything to do with who Coldmere was, and I watched Selah pass it in a way I have never forgotten. They found the boy at dawn, at the tide line, broken on the rocks under the cliff path. He was one of Dreed's, a hired sword, young, hardly more than Pell's age, who'd fallen from the cliff path in the dark and lain broken on the black rocks half the night before the shore folk out early for the low-tide clams came upon him. And by then his own kind up at the hold had given him up for dead and not come looking, because Dreed's men were loyal to Dreed's coin and not to each other, and a broken sword earns no coin. He wore the colors of the hand that starved them. His name, we would learn, was Corin, and he had a shattered leg and 3 broken ribs and a fever coming on, and he lay there in the gray dawn wearing the badge of everything Coldmere hated, and by every reckoning of the world he was theirs to leave. Some of the men wanted to. I will not pretend otherwise. They were not cruel men, they were frightened men, which is a different and more forgivable thing, and a frightened village that has buried its own at the hands of Dreed's swords does not go soft at the sight of one of those swords bleeding on its rocks. "Let the tide have him back," one of them said, not meeting anyone's eye. "He'd not have carried you off the cliff, Wren, if it were you up there. You know it. His lot don't." And Selah knelt down in the cold surf with the boy's shattered leg across her knees, and would not let them. "He's a boy," she said, and her voice had that fierce quiet in it. "He's a boy who took a hard coin because he was hungrier than we are, and that's the only difference between him and Pell, and you know it. Look at him. Look how thin he is under that fine coat. They don't feed the low ones any better than they feed us. They just give them a blade and a reason to look down on somebody. I won't have the tide teach my children that a hurt boy is fair to leave dying because of the color he's wearing." Because the day we learn that is the day we're no better than the man on the cliff. We've just got a smaller cliff. She looked up at Wren, at all of them. Get me the door off Gethin's shed. We're carrying him up. And if it costs us, if Dreed hears we mended one of his and takes it wrong, then it costs us, and I'll stand for it. But we are not going to become the thing we hate to save ourselves a fright. Now lift. And they did, because she was Selah, and because she was right, and because a village that will leave one wounded boy to die will soon leave anyone, and some deep sea-taught wisdom in them knew it. I watched her splint an enemy's leg with her own careful hands, giving him the warmth of the fire she could barely keep, spending medicine she could not spare. And I stopped being a man who was falling in love and became a man who was in it, all the way down, past any hope of climbing out. Because I had spent my whole life around loyalty, and I had never until that moment seen the thing loyalty is only a shadow of. She was not loyal to her own side against the other side. She was loyal to something higher than sides, to the plain fact of a hurt boy, to the honor of not becoming the cruelty you're fighting. She was loyal to what was right, at cost to herself, with nothing to gain and everything to risk, when no king and no crowd and no god was watching to reward her for it. That was the thing I had crossed my whole realm in a beggar's coat to find, and had stopped believing in, and had half decided did not exist. It existed. It was mending an enemy's leg by a dying fire and calling it the only decent thing to do. The boy Corin lived, and in the living he became, without any of us quite deciding it, ours. He woke on the third day, feverless, and the first thing he saw was Selah spooning broth into him, and the first thing he did was flinch, the deep, whole-body flinch of someone who has learned that anyone leaning over him is about to take something. And Selah just kept spooning, patient as tide, and said, "You're in Coldmere. You fell off the cliff path. Your leg's set and it'll mend if you're a fool about resting it, which you will be because you're young. Eat." And the boy ate, and watched her the whole time with the baffled, wary eyes of someone who cannot make the world in front of him match the world he was taught. I sat with him in the days after more than the others could bring themselves to, partly because a beggar and a broken sword are both nobody, and nobody keeps company easily with nobody. Partly because I saw something in him I understood. He talked, once he trusted that I would not turn on him. The young talk to anyone who will simply listen, and no one at the hold had ever simply listened to Corin in his life. He'd been a farmer's fourth son, 3 valleys inland in a bad year. His father could feed 3 sons and not 4, and so at 15 Corin had walked to the coast because a man in a tavern said the castellan of Grimter paid coin to any lad who could hold a spear and wasn't squeamish. "I thought I'd send Silver home," he told me, staring at the turf ceiling. "First year. I thought I'll be a soldier, I'll send Silver, my mother won't have to." He stopped. "They don't let you send it home. The coin all goes back to the hold in dice and drink and the fines they lay on you for nothing. It's a trap dressed up as a wage. By the time you understand it, you owe them, and a man who owes the castellan doesn't walk down the cliff road a free man." He turned his head and looked at me. "I've done things on that cliff I don't tell over, taking from folk who had less than my mother ever did." I told myself they were only fishers. Dreed's men were taught to think the shore folk are barely people, that they'd rob us blind if they weren't kept down. His voice cracked. "And then I fell off a cliff, and the shore folk carried me up on a door, and that woman fed me her own supper, and I can't make it fit. I've been trying for 3 days, and it won't fit." "No," I said, "it doesn't fit. That's the point. She's showing you the world's a different shape than they told you. Let it be a different shape. It's not too late for a man to learn the world's shape over again. I'm doing it myself." He looked at me a long moment, this ragged, gray-eyed beggar giving him counsel like an old king, and something in his face I did not name at the time. A first flicker of the loyalty that would, in the end, matter more than he could have known. "You talk strange for a wrecked man," he said. "The sea rattled something loose," I said, and he laughed, the first laugh I'd heard from him, and winced because of his ribs, and I felt absurdly as proud of that laugh as of any battle I had ever won. It was Corin, in a way, who nearly cost me everything, though he never knew it, and it was no fault of his. A patrol came down the cliff a week later, 4 of Dreed's men, and among them was a scarred sergeant named Vasek who I had marked, on the earlier counts, as the most dangerous of the lot, not cruel for pleasure like some, but watchful, a man who noticed things. They came asking after a lad who'd gone off the cliff path and never been found, half hoping to write him off, half suspicious. And they came into the very yard where I was splitting driftwood, and Vasek's eye fell on me. I had grown careless. That is the truth of it. Weeks of being nobody had let me forget how a king stands, and I had straightened at the sound of horses into the old bearing without thinking, shoulders back, chin level, the stance of a man who has never once in his life stepped aside for anyone. Vasek looked at me splitting wood in a beggar's rags, and I watched a small frown gather between his brows, the frown of a man whose eyes are telling him something his sense cannot place. A big man, gray-eyed. Standing like what? Like no beggar Vasek had ever collared. "You," he said, walking his horse closer. "Where are you from? You've the look of a soldier gone to seed, a deserter maybe. There's coin for deserters." And every instinct I owned told me the wrong things. Told me to answer him as a king answers, to let the wolf show in my eyes just enough to make a hired sword's blood run cold. It would have worked. It would also have been the end of everything. Vasek back up the cliff to Dreed with word of a strange, soldierly beggar, Dreed's suspicion roused. The whole slow truth I was living pulled up by the roots before it had taught me what I came to learn. It was Corin who saved me. Corin, propped in the doorway on a crutch Gethin had made him, wearing a fisher's borrowed shirt over his own broken body, who called out in a bored, pained voice. "Leave the poor half-wit alone, Sergeant. He's soft in the head. C took his wits along with his boat. He can't tell you where he's from because he doesn't know. Watch." And Corin looked at me and said, slow and loud, the way you speak to a simpleton, "What's your name, fellow, your name?" And I understood, and I let my straight shoulders sag, and I let my face go slack and lost, and I said in a thick, wandering voice, "Bell, the bell rings." I helped ring the bell, which was true and sounded from a wrecked man's mouth, exactly as witless as I needed it to. Vasek's frown broke into contempt, which is the safest thing to be under, and he spat in the dust. "See touched," he said, losing interest all at once, the way hard men do with anything broken they can't use. He turned his eye on Corin instead. "And who are you, then, cripple?" "Fell off your cliff path chasing a runaway," Corin said, and there was not a tremor in it, though I knew what it cost him to sit calm under his own sergeant's gaze and lie. "Shore folk found me, mended me for the bounty they thought was on me. Joke's on them, there's no bounty on a nobody." He shrugged and winced. "I'll come up when the leg holds my weight. Tell the paymaster Corin's not dead, worse luck for the paymaster." It held. Vasek looked from the sea-touched half-wit to the crippled soldier, and saw two broken nothings not worth another moment of a cold afternoon, and he wheeled his horse and took his patrol back up the cliff, and I stood there with a split of driftwood in my hand, and my heart going like a war drum, saved by a boy Dreed's own men had left for dead. When they were gone, Corin sagged against the doorframe, gray. "I don't know why I did that," he said, almost to himself. "Lied to Vasek. He'd have flogged me for it if he knew. I don't even know who you are half-wit." He looked at me, and there was something raw and new in his young face. "But that woman fed me her supper, and you sit with me when nobody else can stomach the color I'm wearing. And Vasek would have handed you over for a bounty and drunk it that same night." He shook his head slowly. "I think I've picked my side. I think I picked it lying on those rocks and just didn't know yet." I gripped his shoulder carefully for the ribs, and I did not trust my voice for a moment. "You picked well," I said. "Better than you know. Remember when the day comes that you picked it yourself. That'll matter to you later." I did not know how soon later would be. I should say a word about the bell, because the bell is the heart of it, and because Dreed came for the bell before he came for anything else, and I want you to understand why. The bell was the shore's one unbroken thing. Dreed could take the fish and the boats and the young men. The one thing he could not stamp out was that broken bronze note that meant "Hide what you love, they're coming." He had hunted for it for years, where they kept it, how they hid it, who rang it, and never found out because the whole village kept the secret the way you keep a heartbeat without thinking altogether. Selah was its keeper. She moved it. It never hung in the same place 2 seasons running, and only she and Gethin always knew where. When it needed ringing, whoever was nearest the current hiding place rang it, and then it was moved again in the dark. A cracked bell, a small thing, and it was the difference between a shore that was oppressed and a shore that was conquered, and every soul in Coldmere knew it, and so did Dreed, which is why he wanted it so badly and could not have it. I saw that season how badly. Twice his men came down not for the tithe, but for the bell alone, on Dreed's specific order, and both times they tore the shore apart looking. They pulled Gethin's shed to pieces board by board. They turned out the drying lofts, spilled the salt barrels, put their spears through the thatch of 3 houses probing for a hidden hollow. They stood a weeping woman in her own doorway and took her home apart around her because Dreed had a notion the bell might be under her floor. And they found nothing, every time, because the bell was never where a searching man would think to look. Selah saw to that. with a mind for hiding places that a spymaster would have envied, and because not one soul in Coldmere, under the spears, under the threats, ever gave it up. A shore that would not trade one wounded enemy boy to the tide would not, it turned out, trade its own beating heart to Dreed for any price he could name. "It's not the bronze," Selah told me one evening when I'd helped her move it. "I'll not tell you where, even now, under cover of a moonless dark. Dreed thinks if he finds the bronze and melts it, he wins. He doesn't understand. The bell isn't the bronze. The bell is we warn each other. The bell is we don't let each other be taken in the dark. He could find it and melt it tomorrow, and I'd have another cast by the next new moon and hang it in a new place, because the thing it means can't be melted. That's what he can't stand. He can starve us and he can take our sons, but every time that broken note goes out over the water, it says a shore he doesn't own can still call itself a shore. It says we're still here." She looked at me in the dark, this net mender with a burn scar on her wrist. "That's worth more than a full belly in the end. A full belly with no bell is just a well-fed thing waiting to be eaten. I'd rather ring and starve than eat and go silent. I have made law in the years since, off the back of that sentence. I have built a reign on it, though the men who serve under that reign do not know they serve under a net mender's philosophy. I would rather ring and starve than eat and go silent. There is not a lord in my hall who understands loyalty half so well as the woman who said that to me in the dark, moving a cracked bell so a tyrant could not find her people's heart. I fell in love with her slowly, and then all at once, which is a foolish thing to say and the only true way to say it. Slowly in the days, 100 small sights of her, the way she pushed a loose strand of hair off her face with the back of a wrist because her hands were full of net. The way she laughed rarely, a startled sound like she'd surprised herself. The way she'd go quiet and fierce when someone was frightened, gathering all her calm and spending it on them. And then all at once, past any pretending, until there was no hour of the day her face was not the thing my mind returned to the way a tide returns to a shore. I nearly told her more than once. The words came all the way up into my mouth. "Selah, I am not what you think I am, the king. I came to see if anyone still kept faith, and you are the faith I was looking for, and I swallowed them every time. And I have spent years since asking myself why, and I think the truth is not a flattering one. I think I was afraid. Not of danger, I had faced enough of that. I was afraid that the moment I said the word king, the thing I had found would change. That she would look at me the way the lords looked at me. That she would begin, even a little, even without meaning to be careful of me, to weigh me, to give to my crown instead of to me. She had given me a bowl of stew as a gift, the first true gift of my life, because she thought I was no one. If I told her who I was, would I ever be given anything freely again? Or would I go back to being a throne that people fed? So I kept the beggar's coat on one more day, and one more and one more. And then Dreed came down off his cliff, and the days of small choices were over. He came at the turn of the season, when the tithe was due, and he came himself, which he did not often do, riding down the cliff road on a black horse with a score of his hired swords behind him, and his own 2 great gray wolves loping at his stirrups, the wolves he had bought or beaten or bound to himself, for even a usurper on the storm coast could buy wolves if he had coin and cruelty enough. I saw him first from the boats, and I knew him for what he was before I knew a single fact about him, the way you know rot by the smell. A big, handsome, ruined man, gone soft in the wrong places from 20 years of taking, with eyes that had learned to enjoy fear the way other men learn to enjoy wine. He had the village gathered on the strand, that was his way, to make them stand in the cold and wait while he sat his horse and let the waiting do his work. And then he told them, in a voice that carried easily over folk too tired to be defiant, that the tithe was doubled. A sound went through them, not a protest. Coldmere had unlearned protest 20 winters ago. It was lower than that, a kind of collective flinch, the sound a body makes when it is struck in an old bruise. "Doubled," Dreed said again, pleasantly, savoring it. "The North grows expensive to keep quiet, and since I know already that half of you will come to me with your empty hands and your sad songs about the fishing, I'll spare us all the tears. You've a week. Whatever's short of the doubled tithe in a week I take in bodies, your strongest young ones up to the hold to work the difference off." He smiled. "It's fair. A shore that can't pay in fish can pay in hands." And then his eyes went across the gathered village and found Selah and stopped, and I saw him decide something, and my blood went to ice. "Unless," he said, and the pleasantness sharpened into something with teeth, "the shore would like to make me a better offer." He nudged the horse a few steps forward. "There's a bell rings on this coast that I've had a mind to silence for 20 years, and there's a girl I'm told keeps it. He looked at Selah, and he looked at her the way Dreed looked at everything as a thing to be taken. Give me the bell and the bell girl both, and I'll forgive the doubling. She comes up to the hold. The bell stops ringing, and the rest of you keep your children and your single tithe and go on with your small gray lives, one girl and one broken bell against every child on this shore. He spread his hands, a man being reasonable. I do think that's generous. I have been angry in my life. I have been angry the way a king is angry, which is a cold and useful thing, a fire you bank and aim. What went through me on the strand at Coldmere was not that. It was older and worse and had no crown on it. It was the thing that lives underneath the man that I had spent 30 years teaching to heal, and it stood up in me at the sight of that soft, cruel man measuring Selah like a length of net, and it wanted to come out of my chest and cross the strand and end him with my hands. I had my disguise half off. I felt the wolf rising in me, felt my own eyes wanting to change, and I was one heartbeat from being the alpha king on a cold beach with a score of hired swords between me and the woman I loved, and no plan on earth but slaughter. And Selah spoke first and stopped me. No, she said. Not to Dreed, to the village. She had turned her back on the castellan, turned her back on the man who had just offered to trade her, and she was speaking to Coldmere, low and fast and fierce, because she knew what they might do. She knew that a village frightened enough for its children might, in a moment of terror, do the arithmetic Dreed had laid out and hand her up the cliff, and she knew it not with resentment but with a terrible, gentle clarity, and she was moving to stop them from a thing that would break them worse than any tithe. Don't you dare, she said to them, to the frightened faces, to old Gethin whose hands were shaking, to Pell who had gone white. Don't you dare buy your peace with me and think it's a bargain. It's not. It's the first coin, that's all. You give him me and the bell today, and next season it's your daughters, and the season after it's your sons, because a shore that'll trade one of its own to be left alone has taught him it can be done. The bell isn't bronze. The bell is we don't sell each other. You ring that away, and there's nothing left of Coldmere worth the saving. She drew a breath. I know you're afraid for your children. I'm afraid for them too. They're mine as much as yours, everyone. But you do not save children by teaching them their lives are things that can be traded. You save them by showing them they can't be. Let me handle Dreed. Trust me one more time, please. And the fear went out of the strand like a tide turning. I watched it happen. I watched a broken village straighten its spine because one net mender refused, on their behalf, to let them become the thing that would survive at the cost of its own soul. Not one of them moved to take Dreed's offer. Old Gethin stepped up beside her, and then Pell, limping, and then Nan Oren, blind, tapping her way forward on her stick, and then the whole shore, closing quietly around Selah like a shell around a pearl. And it was the bravest and the most useless thing I have ever seen. A starving village with no weapons refusing a warlord with wolves. And I have never in my life been prouder of anyone than I was of every soul on that beach. And there was one more who stepped forward, and I do not think anyone but I understood what it meant. Corin, off his crutch now but still limping in his fisher's borrowed shirt, came out of the crowd of shorefolk and stood with them, one of Dreed's own hired swords, standing on the wrong side of the strand, plain for his sergeant and his castellan to see. It was the bravest thing the boy ever did, braver even than the lie to Vasek, because it was public and it could not be walked back. He put himself, broken leg and all, in the shell that had closed around Selah, and he lifted his chin at Dreed, and though he said nothing, his whole body said it. I know what you are now. I'm not yours anymore. Dreed's eye found him, and Dreed's smile went out. Well, the castellan said softly, the dead boy walks, and chooses the fishers. He looked at Corin the way a man looks at a dog that has bitten him. You misunderstand, he said then louder to all of them, and now the true thing under the pleasantness showed itself. That was the offer. I don't require you to accept it. He lifted a gloved hand, and his hired swords came off their horses, and his 2 gray wolves lowered their heads and their hackles rose. Take the girl, he said, and find the bell. Take the shed apart, take the houses apart, take them apart if you have to. I've been patient with this coast for 20 years. He gathered his reins. My patience was the only kind thing about me. You've spent it. And the turncoat, his eyes flicked to Corin. The turncoat can climb back up the cliff with me and learn what we do to men who forget who feeds them. They came for her, and I threw off the coat. I do not remember deciding. I have tried to remember it, and there is nothing there, no thought, no plan. There is the beggar's cloak in the sand, and there is me standing over it. and in between there is only the anchor in my chest pulling so hard that the man came off it the way a boat comes off its mooring in a gale, all at once, with a sound like something tearing. I let them see me. That is the closest word for it. For weeks I had been folding myself small, hiding the height and the shoulders, and the way a man stands who has commanded armies. I had been keeping the wolf so far down that Dreed's own wolves had loped past me on the strand and taken me for nothing. Now I stopped hiding, and I let all of it up at once, and I felt the change go over me the way the tide goes over the flats, the beggar drowning and the king rising in his place. And I heard across the strand a sound I will remember to my last hour, Dreed's two great gray wolves stopping dead in their tracks and lying down. They knew me. That is the thing the hired wolves of the Storm Coast knew that Dreed had never understood, for all his coin, that a wolf can be bought. But the blood in a wolf remembers the true thrown the way iron remembers the lodestone and cannot be coined out of it. His wolves had been paid to hunt ashore of frightened fishers. They had not been paid to raise a hackle at the Alpha King of the North, and no coin in the world could have made them, because the moment they smelled what I truly was, every wolf on that beach that had a drop of the old blood knew the difference between a castellan who fed them and the king they were born to. They went down into the sand on their bellies, both of them, and one of them, I swear this, and Selah will swear it too, began, low in its throat to Keen. A wolf that had served 20 years of cruelty, weeping to be forgiven for it, at the feet of a beggar who had turned into its king. The hired sword stopped. A man does not need to know a face to know that the air has changed. They stood on the strand with their blades half drawn and looked at the huge gray-eyed stranger they had kicked in the ribs weeks past, and they watched their master's own wolves lie down and cry at his feet, and among them Vasek the watchful, who had frowned at a beggar who stood like a king and been talked out of his own eyes by a crippled boy. Vasek went white to the lips, because Vasek understood, before any of the others, exactly what he had almost collared in a wood yard. And exactly what it meant that he had not. Kalen, I said. It was the first time I had said my own name in a month, and it came out of me low, and it carried the length of the strand, over the surf, up to the man on the black horse. Kalen of the Grey Throne, Alpha King of the North Wolves, son of the king who held this coast before your grandfather, was a thief. I began to walk toward him, and the sand did not so much as whisper, the whole beach gone that silent. You asked a moment ago whether any king would come. Another step. I have been 3 weeks and more in this village, Dreed. I have hauled its nets and eaten its bread and slept by its fire. I have watched you starve it, and I have watched it refuse to break, and I have learned more about my own realm from these people you call small gray lives than I learned in 30 years on my throne. Another step, and now I was close enough to see the fear come into his soft, cruel face, the real fear, the first honest thing I had seen there. You wanted the bell silenced. You have it exactly backward. The bell is the only thing on this coast that never stopped believing a king would come. I stopped. Here I am. To his swords I said only, you were paid in coin. I know what a hired blade is. I hold no death over a man for taking a wage in a hard world. Put the blades in the sand and you'll climb the cliff a free man tonight and never serve a Dreed again. Keep them up and stand between me and that woman, and I will not be gentle. One by one, the swords went point down into the sand. Vasek's first. He would tell me later that he laid his down not out of fear, but out of a kind of relief he had not felt in 20 years, the relief of a man who has finally been given permission to stop. Dreed tried at the end to be a warlord. I will give him that much. He was a coward and a thief and 20 years a tyrant, but at the very end, seeing his wolves gone and his men laying down their steel and the king in front of him, he tried to spur his horse forward and cut me down himself, to buy with one mad stroke the thing his whole rotten reign had never earned. And I let the wolf up the rest of the way, and I met him, and it was quick, and it was not gratuitous, and I will not dress it for you as anything but what it was. The ending of a hard thing that had gone on too long and should have ended 20 years before and was mine to end because I was the one who had let it go on. He fell on the strand of Coldmere, and the sea took him the way it takes everything in the end, without hurry and without malice, and the Storm Coast was free. There was a silence after, and then the broken bell began to ring. Nan Oren, who could not see, had gone in the confusion to where she knew Selah had last hidden it, and had found it by feel and was ringing it. Not the warning now, 3 and 3 and 3, but something new. A wild, uneven, joyful clangor that no one had ever taught the shore because the shore had never had cause to learn it. It was the sound of a bell rung for gladness. And the whole village on the strand made a sound to match it. And up on the cliff, the fortress of Grimter stood empty and gray and finished against the sky. And I turned around, in the ringing and the crying, and I found the only face on the whole shore that was not turned to me in awe. Selah stood a little apart where she had stood to shield the village, and she was looking at me, and her face was not awe. It was something far harder to bear. It was the face of a woman rearranging everything she knew in a hurry in the cold. The man she'd pulled from the sea, the beggar she'd fed her stew, the stranger she'd hidden and worked beside and sat with by the fire, dissolving in front of her and reforming as the king who had not come for 20 years and had been in her house all along under a lie. I saw the joy of the freeing in her, yes. But under it, quicker, sharper, I saw the hurt, and I understood it completely, because it was the very thing I had been afraid of, come true from the wrong direction. I had been afraid that if she knew I was the king, she would stop giving to the man and start giving to the crown. And instead I had let her give to the man for weeks, her bread, her trust, her fire, her care, while I sat inside a lie and took it all under a false name. She had given the first true gifts of my life, and she had given them, it must have seemed to her now, to a man who was not real. I crossed the strand to her. The village parted for me, they could not help it now, they knew, and it was the loneliest walk of my life, because every step of it took me farther from the man she had known, and I was terrified she would only ever see the king from here on. I stopped in front of her. I did not tower. I have never in my life worked so hard to be small. I should have told you, I said, low only for her, though the whole shore strained to hear. The first night, or the 10th, every day I meant to, and every day I was a coward about it, and I dressed the cowardice up as caution, and that was a lie too. I made myself hold her eyes. I came to this coast to find out whether anyone in my realm still kept faith when no king was watching. I'd stopped believing anyone did. I was so busy being wounded that lords loved my crown, and not my person, that I'd forgotten I owed anything to the people under it. And then I washed up half dead in front of a woman who fed a drowned stranger the last of her stew and asked nothing, and hid a beggar from armed men at the risk of her life, and mended an enemy's leg because leaving him would have cost her soul, and refused to let a village trade one girl for peace because she understood, better than any king I ever knew, that some prices aren't worth paying to survive. My voice was not steady, and I did not try to make it. I found the faith I came looking for, Selah. It was you. It was you the whole time, and I lied to you while I found it, and I am more sorry for that than for anything I have done in my life. She was quiet a long moment. The bell had stopped. The whole shore was still. You let me give you my stew, she said finally, and her voice cracked on it, when you could have bought this whole coast twice over. Yes. You let me be afraid for you, hide you, lie to Dreed's men for you, when you could have killed the lot of them any day you liked. Yes, I did not defend it. There was no defense. Every day, and every day I chose one more hour of being someone you gave things to freely, instead of a king you gave things to because I was a king. I chose it selfishly, and I chose it wrong, and I'd give anything to have chosen honestly. I drew a breath. But I won't lie to you about the reason, even now, because you've had enough lies from me. The reason I couldn't stop was that no one in my whole life has ever given me anything the way you gave me that bowl of stew. As a gift, to me, not to the crown, not to the power, not to what I could do for them, to me when I was nothing, when I could do nothing back. You are the only person who has ever loved the man and not the king, because you're the only person I ever let meet the man first. My throat closed. And I understand if that's ruined now. I understand if all you can see from here on is the crown, the way everyone else does. That's the thing I was afraid of. That's the coward's whole secret. But I would rather have you angry at Kaelin than adored by all the rest of them together. And I am giving you the choice, Selah, the same as I'd have given it if I'd stayed a beggar. I'm the king of the north, and this is my coast now, and it will never kneel to Dreed again. That's done whether you send me away or not. You owe me nothing for it. It was mine to do, and I did it 20 years too late. What you decide about me is separate, and it's yours, and there's no wrong answer and no crown behind it. You can tell me to go back up my cliff and rule my coast from a decent distance and never trouble your fire again. Or, Kaelin, she said my name, my true name, that only she had ever said as if it were just a name and not a title. And she was almost smiling now, that startled laugh gathering at the edge of it, and there were tears on her face, and she reached out with one chapped net mender's hand and put it flat against my chest, over the place where the anchor had caught the night I washed up, and I felt her feel it. I saw it go through her. The pull, the drop, the fixing, the bond that had been mine alone for 3 weeks arriving in her all at once, and her eyes going wide with the enormity of it. She stood there with her hand on my heart, feeling what I had felt on the shingle, understanding it now the way I had understood it then. that she was anchored to and had been, and that the tide could pull all it liked. "You great fool," she said for the second time, exactly as she'd said it on the strand the first night, with no anger in it and all the wonder in the world. "You could have told me. I fed you the stew because you were cold and hungry and mine to help. It wouldn't have changed a thing to know your name. Kalen or Beggar, you were still a wet fool I dragged off my shore, and I'd have fed you the same." The laugh broke out of her, wet and astonished. "You spent 3 weeks afraid I'd only love the crown, and the whole time the reason I couldn't stop watching you was that you were the only lord's worth of a man I ever met who hauled nets till his hands bled and never once acted like it was beneath him. I didn't fall for a beggar, you fool. I fell for the man who kept showing up. You just happened to be a king underneath. I'll forgive you the lie." Her hand curled into the front of my ragged shirt. "But you're going to spend a long time earning it, and you're going to start by never, ever letting me feed you the last of the stew again, because I'll never live it down." "A long time," I said. My own voice had gone to ruin. "How long were you thinking?" And she looked up at me, the net mender the world had called bell girl, the quiet keel of a broken village, the one honest heart in all my realm, and she said, "The rest of it, if you can bear the shame of a Luna who's seen you cry into a stew bowl." "I could bear it. I have borne it gladly for a very long time." I named her Luna of the North on the strand at Coldmere, in the ragged remains of a beggar's clothes, with a cracked bell for a trumpet and a village of net menders for a court, and I have crowned nothing since that I was prouder to crown. There was no white light. There was no ancient seal that woke to her blood, no hidden royal line revealed, no wolf shape she'd concealed all her life come roaring out to silence the doubters. I have heard the ballads the shore made after, and some of them have put those things in because folk like their Lunas marked by destiny, and I let the ballads say what they like. But you should know the truth of it, because the truth is the whole point. Selah was not secretly a great thing under the small thing. She was exactly what she appeared to be. A net mender, a bell keeper, a woman with chapped hands and a burn scar on her wrist and no gift in her but the plainest and rarest one there is the will to do the right and costly thing when no one is watching and there is nothing to be won. That was her whole magic. That was always enough. It was more than enough. It was the thing I had crossed a kingdom to find and stopped believing in, and it turned out to be living in a turf house on the poorest shore of my realm, sharing out stew so no child would know it had been given. The folk who had called her bell girl like it was less than a name learned to say Luna instead, and they learned it gently, without being made to grovel for the old slight, because Selah would not have it. "They were frightened," she said, "and frightened people say small things. We're not going to be cruel to them now that we can afford to be. That's how it starts." And so the humbling of Coldmere's small doubts was the softest humbling there ever was. They simply woke one morning to find the girl they'd underestimated standing beside the king, and understood, all at once and forever, what they'd had among them all along, and loved her the more fiercely for having nearly missed it. I did not forget Corin. A king who is saved by a boy and forgets him is no king worth the name. I offered him a place in my own guard, and he flushed to the ears and told me he'd rather go home. He had a mother 3 valleys inland who thought him lost, and silver he now, at last, was free to send her. I gave him the silver and a good horse and Vasek for an escort, because Vasek too had chosen at the end to lay down his blade, and a man who has spent 20 years learning to serve cruelty deserves the chance to learn to serve something better. I made him the first captain of a new Coldmere watch, sworn not to a hold on a cliff but to the shore itself, and he served it well and faithfully to the end of his days, and wept, they say. The first time he heard the bell rung for gladness under a watch that was his to keep. Corin comes back still most summers, a broad farmer now with sons of his own, and he always walks down to the strand where he fell, and he always tells his boys the same thing, that he was a hired sword on the wrong side of the world, and he fell off a cliff, and a woman he'd been taught to despise fed him her supper and changed the shape of the world he lived in, and that the shape of the world is a thing you're allowed to learn over again, no matter what they taught you first. It is, I think, the best sermon preached anywhere in my realm, and it is preached by a farmer on a cold beach to 2 bored boys who will understand it one day. I ruled the Storm Coast differently after. I ruled all of it differently. I went home to the Grey Hall and I looked at my border lords with their oaths held out like coins, and I was not wounded by them any more, because Selah had cured me of the wound, not by telling me those oaths didn't matter, but by showing me where the real ones lived. I stopped waiting to be loved for myself by men who'd only ever known my crown, and I started going out, quietly, more often than any king should, into the small gray corners of my realm where no one expected me, to find the sailors, the ones keeping faith in the dark with no one watching, and to make sure this time that a king came. And here is the thing I have never told the ballad makers, the thing that is only ours. Every winter on the turn of the season, when the tithe would once have come due and Dreed would once have ridden down his cliff, I take a plain cloak out of a cedar chest where it has lain folded all the year, a dead man's cloak, salt-stiff, mended at the shoulder by a net mender's hand, and I put it on, and I walk down alone to the shore at Coldmere as no one. No crown, no guard, no wolves. Only a gray-haired man in a beggar's coat, walking the strand where the sea once tried to kill him and a stranger pulled him out. I am an old king now, and my knees do not love the cold shingle the way they once did, and my sister says I am a sentimental fool to do it, and she is right, and I do not care. Because every winter, when I have walked the length of the cold strand as no one, I come round the point of the seawall, and she is there. She always knows. She is there in the last gray light with her braid gone silver now and whipping in the wind, and she watches the ragged old man come up the shore toward her, and she does not treat me like a king, because for 1 hour a year on the shore where it began, I get to be only the man who kept showing up, and she gets to be only the woman who'd have fed him the same either way. And when I reach her, she puts one hand flat against my chest, over the place where the anchor caught, and she feels it hold, the way it has held for all these years and will hold past the end of me. And she says the thing she always says, the thing that is worth more to me than the whole north and every wolf in it. "There you are," she says. "I've been waiting." She had been waiting 20 winters when I found her. So had the whole shore, so though I did not know it, had I. I do not keep her waiting any more.